Hello, and welcome to Media Training for Small Business Owners. This presentation is brought to you by Small Business Majority. My name is Simon Brown, and I am the Media Relations Manager for Small Business Majority. I will be showing you how you can use media to your advantage. If you have any questions, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. First, a little about my organization. Small Business Majority is a small business education and advocacy organization. We were founded and run by small business owners. We have been in business since 2005. We are a national organization with 8 offices in Washington, D.C., California, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, Missouri, and Virginia. We focus on issues of top importance to small businesses, and when we say small businesses, we mean those with fewer than 100 employees, as well as the self-employed, including access to capital, healthcare, retirement, entrepreneurship, taxes, and more. All of our work is supported by extensive research. We also have an entrepreneurship program which brings resources and education to small business owners in key areas on how to run and grow their businesses. Now I will tell you a little bit about myself. I am a former journalist who reported for outlets like NBC and Sports Illustrated. I once spent 60 hours watching ping pong during the Summer Olympics. For the last 7 years, I've worked in nonprofit communications in Washington, D.C. At Small Business Majority, I write op-eds, letters to the editor, press releases, and talking points. I also interact with dozens of reporters, and I prepare business owners for their media appearances. Today we will be discussing why you should engage with media. Learning how to engage with media can lead to coverage that benefits your company. It can elevate your brand and position you as a leader in your field or in the small business community. One of the biggest benefits of media engagement is that you can get free publicity. For example, one story in your local newspaper can be the equivalent of about $6,000 worth of advertising. And if you are fortunate to land a story in a major national outlet, that can be worth as much as $50,000 of advertising. Media engagement also allows you to advocate for positive changes that will help your business. Unfortunately, we live in a challenging time for dealing with media. And the reality is that getting reporters to write about you is very hard today. To put that in context, newsroom jobs fell 23% between 2008 and 2017, and most of those losses were at newspapers. In fact, newspaper newsrooms shrunk by 45% during that period. And unfortunately, I don't imagine those jobs will be coming back anytime soon. The result of these staffing losses is that there is more news than ever today and fewer people out there to cover those stories. In fact, reporters at top publications sometimes get as many as 100 pitches or more per day, meaning that it's very difficult to break through to reporters if they don't know you, which is why it's critical that you follow certain steps in order to establish a relationship. In order to use media to your advantage, the very first thing you have to do is be proactive. That means you absolutely have to spend time and effort reaching out to reporters. The reality is they don't necessarily know you exist. They don't know who you are or what your business is. So you have to let them know that you're here and that you're ready to speak with them. But if you're not able to tell your story through a reporter, another way to do that is to just use your own words by submitting letters to the editor or op-eds, allowing you to share your perspective with a wide audience. If you want to be in the news, the first step is just to read the news. You need to know what sorts of stories reporters are writing, and just as importantly, who is writing those stories. Fortunately, most publications today either offer partial or entirely free content online. So if you're not interested or able to get a subscription to your local publications or even national publications, you at least have the option of reading a good amount of content for free online. And that should give you a good starting point. One of the most important things to keep in mind is that reporters are looking for stories that feature some sort of conflict and impact a large number of people. That's why all of the major national stories are on things like natural disasters or what's happening in Washington, D.C., because they're dramatic and a lot of people are affected. I realize that not every small business can participate in a large national debate, and not every small business has a story that involves a great deal of conflict. And so the opening that I think a lot of small businesses have for breaking into a news story is with a feel-good piece, which is also known as a human interest story. And what that means is maybe you have a business that makes an effort to hire ex-cons. Maybe you have a business that donates a portion of proceeds to charity. Those are the kinds of stories that reporters, they may not be prioritizing them in today's climate, but they're still interested in those stories because people do still like good news from time to time. And even if your business itself doesn't have a feel-good aspect, maybe you yourself as a business owner are a feel-good story. Maybe you built your business up from nothing. Maybe you got a $100 loan from a friend and you turned that into a multi-million-dollar business. I mean, that can be a feel-good story. And stories like that are always compelling, and that's something that a lot of business owners have access to. One thing that is important to keep in mind is unless you have a story that's related to breaking news, reporters probably won't be willing to write the same sorts of pieces over and over. So if you're reading your local news and you see a story about a small business that is very similar to your own, that means that you will probably have to wait a few months at least until a reporter is willing to revisit a story like that. And that's okay. Sometimes being patient pays off, but at least if you see something that is similar to what you do, that shows that you have a story reporters are interested in, and you'll just have to wait until the next opportunity comes along. So once you've been reading the news and you know which reporters you want to contact, you should absolutely go ahead and start reaching out to them. In the digital age, email really is the best way to do that. Even though reporters may be getting 100 pitches per day from people who want them to write about certain things, most reporters are completely glued to their phones and they are checking their email pretty constantly. And so if you can get their attention, they're going to see your email. There are some exceptions. Some reporters don't spend a lot of time looking through their email because they get a lot of stuff that they aren't interested in, but those reporters sometimes do spend a good deal of time on Twitter. One of the advantages of Twitter is fewer people send reporters pitches through that medium. If you are willing to engage with social media, it can sometimes be worth reaching out to a reporter over Twitter. In fact, there have been instances with major national outlets where I've reached out to a reporter over email. I also sent them a pitch through a tweet, and they saw the tweet before the email, and they got back to me over Twitter. So sometimes that does work. One of the most important things that I want to emphasize today is the way you craft your messages when you reach out to a reporter, particularly for the first time when you're trying to get the relationship started. And that is, flattery will get you everywhere. You should praise the reporter in some way from the subject line on. The reason I recommend that is because with all the talk about fake news today and reporters being called out for any number of things, the media is dealing with a tremendous amount of negativity. They're not getting a lot of flattering messages on a regular basis. And reporters are humans too, and they like to occasionally hear from someone who really enjoyed something they wrote. So if you are following a reporter that you think might write about your business, you should find a story they wrote that you liked and just tell them that. And the important thing to do is not just to say, hey, reporter, I enjoyed your story, and then end there. You need to show that you not only read the story, but that you're thinking about the topic and that you have more to offer the reporter in that issue area. So what you can say is, dear reporter, I really enjoyed this piece that you wrote on, let's say, taxes. I like the points you made about, say, X, Y, and Z, but had you considered another perspective that my small business is facing, and then you can talk about your own experience. And I find very often that reporters who've never interacted with me before will be responsive to a thoughtful letter that does include some sort of praise. One thing I like to tell people is that even though flattery is important, I do think it's also important to be honest. I don't think you should tell a reporter you liked the story when you didn't. But I also think that even if you had some criticism of the story, as long as you do it in a respectful and tactful way, that can be an opening to starting a relationship as well, again with the idea of saying, hey, I read your story, I think you should maybe consider another perspective. Would you be interested in chatting about my view? And that's another way to start a dialogue. And that's really what this is about. You're not necessarily trying to get a reporter to do a feature story on you from the first communication. You're just hoping to get on their radar, and then from there, you can show them what you have to offer as a business owner that could make an interesting story for a reporter. Another very important point is you should not pitch any products to reporters the first time you interact with them. Lots and lots of people who work in public relations are just straight up pitching reporters products that they want publicity for. While you do probably want publicity for your business and your product, that's not the way to get a reporter to write about you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So once you develop a relationship with a reporter, it is critical that you are responsive. As people probably are aware, reporters typically work on very tight deadlines, but even if they're not in a hurry, they really appreciate when you respond to them quickly. And I would define quickly as within an hour. It's pretty common for reporters to reach out to more than one source, and sometimes those sources have similar perspectives. And the result is, if you are the first one to respond, you will probably be the one who gets quoted, because reporters are only going to be able to include so many quotes on the same perspective in one story. And the takeaway from this is, if media is important to you, you have to make a real effort to make yourself available to reporters, even though you're busy running your business. I know that running your business and taking care of what you have to do is going to be at the top of your day-to-day tasks, but if media is something you want to get, you may sometimes have to stop what you're doing and talk to a reporter. If you're unsure about where to find a reporter's contact information so you can reach out, the best place to start is the reporter publication's website. Many stories today will list the reporter's contact info within the story. If it's not listed in the story, you can usually find a staff list somewhere online. If not on the website's publication page, then you can just Google the reporter's name, or often they include their email on their Twitter accounts. Another option, if you want to invest a little bit more resources in media pursuits, there are paid services that offer full databases of reporter contacts. Those can run in the thousands of dollars, so that's probably an expense that you would have to really think about depending on how important media outreach is to you. One thing to remember is reporters are not typically in their offices, but if you've been emailing a reporter a few times and you just can't reach them, try giving them a phone call. It's worth a try. There have absolutely been instances when I've emailed a reporter multiple times and decided to call them, and even if they don't answer the phone, sometimes their voicemail will include their cell phone number, and then you can pretty easily reach them if that is the case. So in order to really build and solidify a relationship with reporters, you have to be helpful to them, and you have to become a resource by providing a reporter with information they can use. At the end of the day, reporters are always in need of a good story idea, and they can only generate so many ideas by themselves. They need you, particularly if you live in a small town or a rural area. There's probably only so much breaking news or events that a reporter can cover at a given time. So if you can provide them with something that makes for a good story, they're going to appreciate that, and they're probably going to come back to you. Now we'll talk a little bit about how to talk to media. If you are successful at getting reporters interested in your business, at some point they will want to interview you by phone. Don't be nervous. Ultimately, you are telling your story, and you can't be wrong about your own life and your own experiences. One of the best ways to prepare for a reporter interview is to come up with a 30-second elevator pitch that you can use when a reporter calls you. If it makes you comfortable to write that down, absolutely feel free to do that. I would advise against reading something verbatim in an interview, because I think people can tell if you're just reading off of a sheet of paper, and sometimes that sounds a little bit overly rehearsed. But if that's what you need to get through it, then that's okay. The important thing is you need to know what message you want to convey, either about yourself or about your business, before the reporter calls you. Regardless of what the reporter asks you, there should be certain ideas or concepts or messages that you want to make sure you impart to the reporter in the space of the conversation. And if you don't think ahead of time what it is that you want to say, chances are pretty good that you'll leave out something that you really wanted to share. One of the nice things is that most reporters will give you an option to kind of have a free form talking time toward the end of the interview after they've finished all their questions. So if for some reason you didn't get a chance to use your 30-second pitch during the main portion of the interview, at the end you should feel free to just deliver it, and hopefully they'll use some of that. If in the course of the interview you get a tough question, do not worry about it. If you're being interviewed and it is not live, you don't have to answer any questions you don't want to. And in the next slide, we will talk about how to deal with difficult questions. So if a reporter asks you something that you feel might portray either you or your business in an unflattering light, there's a few different things you can do to dodge the question without making the reporter feel like you have something to hide. Ultimately, it's about maintaining calm and confident dialogue so that the reporter doesn't press you further in an area that you're not comfortable with. So one example is redirection. Reporter asks you a question you don't want to answer. You say, well, I can't speak to that, but what I can tell you is that way you've taken the conversation into a different direction and you're talking about something that you want to talk about. Another option is just to block it, just to say, I don't have the answer right now, but I'll be happy to get back to you. And if it's something that you really don't want to get back to them on, that's okay. You don't have to get back to them later. It's not always the best approach, but in a worst case scenario, that is all right. Now, if it's something that you are comfortable speaking about, you just don't have the information at that moment, then you should get back to them. And then you can dodge. If a reporter asks you a question that you don't want to answer, as a last resort, just give an answer that you want to give. If it's completely out of left field, yes, it will probably throw the reporter off. But in some circumstances, if you are really caught in a difficult situation, you can just speak to something that you are comfortable with and ignore the question. Now we'll talk a little bit about radio and television interviews. I wanted to focus a bit on these because they are the most challenging, even if they're not live. The most important thing for radio and television is you have to know your messaging. If you go into the interview, it's really critical that you sound confident and that you sound like you know what you're talking about, because if you do things like saying or saying regularly or pausing for long periods of time, it will undermine what you're saying, even if you're delivering some really good points, because it makes you seem like you lack confidence. One of the realities of humans is that we respond really well to people who sound confident, even if what they're saying is not necessarily true or accurate. Certainly you should be saying things that are accurate, but it just shows that confidence can overcome a lot. And so if you know your messaging, and if you come in prepared, if you have your elevator pitch, if you know what you want to say, that will enable you to show your authority and show that you really are an expert and know what you're talking about, and people will respond well to your messages. It's really important during an interview to smile. It's important to speak slowly and clearly. And if it's television, you should look your best. If you are doing an interview for a major television network, they will probably help you with hair and makeup. If not, then you will probably have to do it yourself. Unfortunately, the nature of television is it's a superficial medium, and your appearance does sometimes make a difference. If you get a difficult question live on air, that is tougher than if you are doing just a telephone interview with a print reporter. You can't very easily just ignore a question that's tough if the interview is live. But that doesn't mean that you don't have options. You can still do the redirection where you say, I can't speak to this, but I can tell you X. Or you can try something that I've seen people do on live television interviews, which is where you basically throw the reporter off track of the line of questioning. What that means is a reporter asks you a question, and you stop them, and you say, I'll be happy to get to that, but first I want to tell you how happy I am to be here, how glad I am to be talking about my business, and from there, you've sort of gotten the reporter off of their plan of attack for the interview. And if you do that, hopefully they won't come back to the difficult question. If they do come back to the difficult question, you've at least broken their rhythm, and you can again redirect. Most likely, if you're just out there talking about your business and your entrepreneurial story, you probably won't be facing an antagonistic television interview live on air. But the point of going through this is just to show you that no matter how tough a situation may seem, and no matter how unfavorable the environment is to you, you still have the ability to be in control of the interview, even when you're not the one asking the questions. Okay. So reaching out to reporters and telling your story through news articles is one way to engage with media. Another option is to bypass reporters altogether and just write something yourself and submit it to a publication. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through letters to the editor. Normally, a letter to the editor is in response to something that you read in a newspaper, but you still have the option sometimes of writing in even if it's something that wasn't covered. Normally, you can focus on topics that are relevant to your community, and if your local newspaper hasn't covered those yet, they're usually open to community thoughts. So if it's a local newspaper and you live in that town, you should give it a try if there's something you want to talk about that hasn't been covered yet. But the most important thing about a letter to the editor is you don't have much space to get your point across. Normally, you need to be less than 200 words. Some publications have a word count maximum of 150, which might seem like a lot, but if you figure there's about 20 to 30 words in a reasonably packed sentence, that gives you a sense of how much space you've got to write. I will say that in the course of writing letters to the editor, I typically tend to be around 175 to 200. However, I have had letters published in major publications with only 50 words. I think if you have something to say that can be really nice and short and to the point, editors like that, and sometimes it's easier to get something really short published, but it is also harder to write it, and you have to be really diligent about whittling down your message and crafting it and only saying the most important things. If you feel like you have more to say about a topic, another way to engage with media is to write an op-ed. Typically, these are 500 to 700 words. They could be a little bit less than 500. They could be more than 700. I've written 800. Some publications may even take 1,000. It just depends, and you'll have to probably check and see what the specific guidelines are. But if you're going to do an op-ed, to increase your chances of being published, you'll need to address a major issue in your community or in the United States at large. This can be a major news story that you've seen, or it can be something that got a lot of coverage in your local publication. In order to, again, increase your chances of being published, you need to establish in your piece why you're an expert and why your perspective is valuable on this particular issue. So if you are concerned about a tax proposal in your state that you think might negatively impact your business, the fact that you're a business owner pretty much establishes your perspective as being important on an issue like that. If you wanted to take on something like a legal matter, if you're not an attorney, it's probably going to be harder for you to get a piece published. But there are so many issues that impact businesses, and you know the issues that you deal with every day. When those issues are in the news, just the fact that your business is impacted or could be impacted pretty well establishes you as an expert with a valuable opinion that is worth publishing in a newspaper. One of the things that really helps make your piece a meaningful op-ed that will resonate with readers is if you can provide as many details as possible to give people a clear picture of what you're experiencing and why it's important. And so that when writers talk about this, they often refer to it as you want to show the reader what you're talking about, not just tell the reader. And what that means is you don't want to say, this tax proposal is really bad. So you say, okay, it's bad. Why is it bad? Anyone reading that is not going to understand what the impact is. So you have to say, this proposal is bad because it would cost me $3,000 more per year. It can be something simple like that, but it's enough detail that the reader has a clear picture of what you're saying. If you are writing about a policy or legislative topic, small business majority can actually help you with that. A major part of our work is scientific opinion polling of the small business community. We frequently reach out to small business owners to ask them how they feel about certain policy issues, and if you are writing about a policy issue that we've covered in the past, there's a good chance that we have an opinion. And if that opinion is in line with your own, that data can help bolster your argument. And if you visit our website, www.smallbusinessmajority.org, you can get access to all of our research there. Once you've written a letter to the editor or an op-ed, you have to submit. Most publications have either an online form or an email address available for submissions. They usually make it pretty easy to find where you should send your work somewhere on their website. The easiest thing to do is just to Google it. If you've written a longer piece like an op-ed, it's good to submit it through the generic form that's provided, but it's also a good idea to submit it directly to an opinion section editor. That way you're hopefully getting it in front of them rather than just forcing them to sift through all of the many submissions that are in an inbox. And if you're able to reach a specific editor, there is a better chance that they will at least read what you've written, and then you've got a better chance of at least getting a response from the publication one way or the other. If you're not sure whom to submit to or where to submit, you can always call the publication and ask for help. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that publications almost always, the one notable exception recently being a New York Times op-ed from a Trump administration official that was anonymous, but they will not accept anonymous submissions. So if you are uncomfortable about any reaction that you might get to something you've written, you're going to have to put your name on it. If you're not comfortable putting your name on it, then you probably should rethink whether or not you want to submit. Okay. So just to kind of wrap things up, news outlets are one of the best ways to spread your message or promote your business. Building and maintaining relationships with reporters takes time and effort, but if you are willing to make the effort and follow some of the steps that we outlined today, it can be a tremendous benefit to your business. And an example of this is, like, if you look at Shark Tank, a lot of people who go on Shark Tank may not get a deal with an investor, but just being on the show generates a tremendous amount of publicity for their business, and they often end up selling as much product and doing as well as they would have if they actually got a deal. It's just a matter of getting your name out there. Letters to the editor or op-eds are a great way to tell your story. If you have something that you really want to say and you don't necessarily want to use reporters to do that, that is a great option. And ultimately, the most valuable thing you can offer a reporter is yourself. You may have an innovative product, you may have a tremendously successful business, but reporters would rather write about an entrepreneur who is self-made, an entrepreneur who really had to struggle to get to where they are, an entrepreneur who faced, any sorts of adversity. And even though you want to promote the business as much as yourself, if you get a reporter interested in you and your story, the business part of that will come along with it. And if you think about how many entrepreneurs who are extremely successful and well-known, reporters often write about that entrepreneur's backstory as much as they do about the business. So in a way, you want to be selling yourself to reporters as much as you're selling your product. And now we can open it up to some questions. Well, one question we got is, can I submit photos with a letter or opinion piece? Most opinion pieces that get published will include either a small headshot or sometimes a larger photo of the author. It's not a bad idea to submit a photo when you submit your piece, but you don't have to submit it up front. I wouldn't submit photos of products. I would focus on you. If you're holding the product, great, but a photo that's just of your product or just of your shop is probably not something that is likely to get published. Well, it looks like that is all the questions we have for today. This concludes our presentation on media training for small business owners. If anyone has any additional questions, it looks like we got one other question. I am hosting an event in a year. I'd like to get some media attention. Would it be best to start now building and nurturing those relationships first and then ask for coverage later? The answer is yes. It's probably a little early to promote the event itself, but if you want to go ahead and start talking to reporters now to get them interested in you and your business, it's probably not too early to start doing that. If you can talk about who you are and what you're doing, and then maybe down the road stay in touch with the reporter and then tell them about the event as it gets closer. All right, well, now I think that's all the questions that we have. So thank you for attending this media training for small business owners. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to email me at sbrown@smallbusinessmajority.org. Thank you very much for joining.